So this is LSAT Prep Test 146, Section 4, Passage 1. It is a comparative passage on jury nullification. Fairly low difficulty, the topic is pretty straightforward, and the two positions here are obvious. But students still lose points on this one because they get lazy with the details. They see pro versus con and they stop thinking. Now, both passages ask the same question. Should juries have the power to ignore the law and let a defendant walk? Passage A says absolutely not. Passage B says yes, and here's why it's actually a good thing. Now, your job is not to understand that disagreement. That part's easy. Your job is to track exactly where these two authors would clash on specific claims. Now, Passage A gives you a definition of jury nullification in the first few sentences, then immediately pivots to attack mode. The rest of the passage is a list of problems, 3 of them stacked one after another. You want to read this at a steady pace, nothing here is hiding. Problem 1, we can't see it happening. Juries don't explain their verdicts, and so there is no way to know how often nullification occurs. And if you can't measure it, you can't tell whether it's doing more harm than good. Problem 2, juries are flying blind. The kind of evidence that would help them make a smart nullification decision, like a defendant's history, usually gets excluded at trial. Problem 3, juries are not elected. They answer to nobody, and they haven't thought through what happens when they let somebody off. Now, the final paragraph of Passage A is the thesis. You don't want to skim it. The author says disagreements about criminal law should happen in public through the legislature where people can debate them openly. That is the core belief driving every objection I've covered here. The author isn't saying nullification has problems. The author is saying it puts power in the wrong hands. Now, Passage B is the rebuttal, but you want to pay attention to how it's built. It does not go point by point against Passage A. It makes its own case on its own terms. Now, it opens with prosecutors and police. They already have the discretion to decide which cases to pursue and which to drop, and that's a smart rhetorical move. Before Passage B even mentions juries, it has established that discretion is already baked into the system. So when the author calls the jury a safety valve, it lands differently. It's not some rogue power. It's just one more check in a system that already runs on judgment calls. Then Passage B makes two moves that students tend to blur together. You want to separate them. First, legislatures write broad laws because they cannot anticipate every situation. And so when a jury refuses to convict in a specific case, it's covering a gap the legislature left open. That's nullification as a gap filler. Second, when a jury nullifies because it thinks a law is unjust, that is a signal back to the legislature. It's a feedback mechanism. Two different arguments here, and the test will treat them differently. You should also. Now, you want to slow down the last paragraph of Passage B. That is where the author deals with the strongest objection, that juries might nullify for bad reasons. And the answer is basically, it almost never happens. Why? Because all 12 jurors have to agree. 12 different people from different backgrounds reaching the same conclusion is, in the author's opinion, a built-in safeguard. That is a direct counter to Passage A's accountability concern, even though it never names it. Now, here is the key move. Both authors actually agree that nullification can sometimes go wrong. They're not fighting about that. They're fighting about how much it matters. Passage A treats it as a fundamental flaw. Passage B treats it as a rare edge case the system already handles. And that difference in weight is where the hardest questions are going to come from. And there is also a second layer to track. These two authors have totally different ideas about the legislature's role. Passage A says the legislature is where legal disagreements belong, period. Passage B says the jury actually helps the legislature by filling gaps and flagging bad laws. And so when Passage B talks about the legislature, it sounds cooperative. When Passage A talks about the legislature, it sounds territorial. Now, the main trap is thinking this is a clean pro-con split where the authors disagree on everything, but they don't. Passage A's author would probably accept that prosecutors have discretion. The fight is about whether juries deserve that same discretion. So if a question asks what author A would say about a specific claim in Passage B, you don't want to just say disagree. Ask yourself whether that particular claim actually conflicts with anything author A said. Before you go on to the questions, check yourself on 3 things. First, can you explain why Passage B brings up prosecutors before ever mentioning juries? Second, do you know what author A would say about Passage B's claim that nullification helps the legislature? And third, can you name the one safeguard Passage B relies on to dismiss the risk of bad nullification decisions?